How do you grow in your tech career as quickly as possible? All of software engineering is built on working smarter, not harder. So, of course, we should apply those same principles to making progress in our career. Recently, I have scoured the web looking for actionable tips, things you can actually put into practice to advance in your career. That's right, scoured. I've picked my top 10 to share in this video. And I also have one tip of my own, which I think is the most important of all. And I'm gonna break from YouTube tradition by sharing it first, because I think it's going to multiply the value you get from the rest of these tips. So, without further ado, my one tip to rule them all is to consume actively. It's very easy when we're watching YouTube to just put it on in the background and say, yeah, I get it. But if you really want to take your career to the next level, we need to move beyond that. So as we're going through these tips, I want to challenge you to think about three things. One is leverage. How much impact do you think you could get out of this idea for you in your situation in your career? To counter that, how much effort do you think it would take to actually implement this? And ideally, you want to focus on the ideas that have the best ratio between these. Number two is to think about which of these are you already the best at, and which of these do you have the most room for improvement. You're probably already doing all of these to some extent, but we want to identify where you have the biggest room for growth so you can decide which of these is most important for you to focus on. And number three is for each of these, think about who do you know that's the best at this. That might help give you a better idea of for each of these, are you really doing them well? Or maybe there's something you can learn from other people that you're working with. So with that mindset of thinking actively and how you can actually apply these to your career, let's dive in and look at the rest of the tips. Finally, tip one, understand what people are looking for to take you to the next level. Whether that means getting a promotion in your current job or applying to something new. The second habit of the oft quoted 7 habits is to begin with the end in mind. In the same way that you might dive into the product requirements for a certain feature, you want to understand the requirements for getting to that next level. There are some things that people are looking at, things that they're looking for you to do and to demonstrate, and there are other things that are maybe not important. And having a clear understanding of that process, who is going to be making these decisions, what are they looking for, helps you focus your effort. Again, working smarter, not harder. Tip 2, do great work and be loud about it. I've also heard this phrase as over communicate. Now, this doesn't mean to be obnoxious or to monopolize your stand-up meeting by bragging about everything that you've done. But it does mean to put in the time and energy to make sure that your work is visible and that it's presented in the best possible light. You know that when a company launches a product, probably half the work is helping people find out about it. And the same is true about your own work within a company, at least to a smaller scale. Now, this may take the form of status updates or project reports. It's important not just to say we did X, Y, and Z, but take the time to explain the context, what were the challenges, and what was the impact. Now, a lot of engineers are natural introverts, including myself, and it can feel distasteful to be spending time marketing or promoting ourselves. We worry that no one wants to hear about it and we're just being obnoxious. And a great piece of advice that I once read was to try to make the opposite mistake. Obviously, there is a sweet spot, which is the perfect amount of loudness, the perfect amount of promoting yourself and your work. Most introverts will naturally fall short of that spot where you are not talking about yourself, you're not giving your work enough credit. And the idea of trying to make the opposite mistake is just for maybe 2 weeks, try to be too loud, right? Try to get to the point where someone is actually complaining that you're being too obnoxious, that you're promoting yourself too much. Very likely your natural instinct, which is a little on the shy side, means that if you're aiming to be too loud, you're going to hit that sweet spot, right? And worst case scenario, you succeed in being too loud, but then you find out where that line is and you can always reel it back, right? It's just an experiment. Now, I should clarify, when I'm saying too loud, I'm obviously not talking about volume. I'm not necessarily talking about frequency as well, but I am talking about the amount of energy and effort that you put into promoting yourself and your work. That can look like spending time to identify the best places and formats to do that in your company, to learning how to communicate well and to tell the story of your work so that your communication is more effective at getting the point across and helping people understand how good the work was. So again, do great work, be loud about it. It doesn't matter how awesome your code is or how many features you land if nobody knows about it. So tip 3 is to write things down. Especially as I'm getting older, my brain is not able to hold all the important information it needs. So offload that responsibility to a piece of paper, to Notion, any central and convenient place where you can keep some notes, especially as you are combining this with tip 2 to be loud about your work, but you're not necessarily going to have all the context, remember what were the challenges and how you overcame them. So writing those things down as you go will be critical later when you are trying to be loud about your work. I've seen this referred to as a brag document, and there's a great video by A Life Engineered that talks about that. I also find it useful just in my day-to-day work, especially going over the weekend, to write down the state of some projects, who I'm waiting for, what are the challenges I'm trying to solve, things that maybe wouldn't make sense in a public status report, but help me pick things back up when I come in on Monday. You probably wouldn't write code without autocomplete, and I find it very helpful to maintain a similar tool for things like open task pull requests, etc., or even just maintaining my personal list of important documents that I'm always looking for and can never seem to find. Tip 4 is to try to understand the bigger picture. And there may be 3 aspects of this. One is your product, one is your technology, and one is your company. For each of these, you want to have a good understanding of where you fit in to that bigger picture. If you're working on a particular feature, what is the point of it? How does that fit into the product? What are the real problems that you're trying to solve? When it comes time to foresee some gaps in the project requirements, or when you need to be reducing scope and you need to know what gives you the biggest bang for your buck, it's important to have that bigger picture. Similar with tech, how does your code fit into the overall project? Are there opportunities to write tooling or build things in a better way to make things easier for yourself or your team in the near future? And of course, your company. Where does your team sit? What are the real goals and objectives that your organization is trying to accomplish? I like to think of an engineering org as an expedition traveling through a strange land. And the product team is trying to get us somewhere, and the company is trying to achieve some objectives. And as engineers, we're the ones who actually climb the mountains or go through the forest. And we're the ones who know how difficult these things are, which routes are easy and which are hard. And so if you're communicating, understand the big picture of where we're trying to go, then you can identify opportunities like, hey, if we go that way around this giant mountain, we can get to a very similar place with much lower cost. All right, I promise the rest of these are gonna go a little faster, so I wanted to check in on that active consumption. Which of these so far has seemed the most relevant to you? Which are you already crushing, and which can you use some improvement? Who do you know that's the best at each of these? All right, let's get crazy in here. We're gonna do 5 and 6 together, and both of these are about broadening your horizons in tech. Number 6 is to consume content about tech, about architecture, design, new technologies, whether this be reading books or watching YouTube videos. I would absolutely recommend both Fireship and ByteByteGo. And there's lots of other great content out there. If you want my full list, leave some comments and maybe I'll make a video about it. But then coming above number 6 is number 5, which is to build a side project in a language you don't know, in a domain you don't know. When I got into tech, it was through game development. My primary language was C# and I was using the Unity engine to build games, mostly for mobile. Then when I built a full stack web app as a side project using Golang and React, that really broadened my horizons. It was especially interesting to be able to compare how things were done in Golang versus C#. Getting multiple languages and multiple domains or industries under your belt, not only do you get to see some of the good things or bad things from different sides, but it opens you up to the idea that there are drastically different ways of doing things than what you've been taught and what you already know. And that lesson in itself is priceless, but it really only comes from doing the work. And so that's why I put building a side project above consuming content. Again, engineering is active. You learn so much better when you're putting things into practice than just consuming things passively. The next tip is interviewing, meaning conducting interviews for your company as part of the hiring process. Once you've gone through that bureaucracy, then really it requires minimal effort compared to the benefit it can bring in. It forces you to stay sharp with your data structures and algorithms. It teaches you how to teach programming as you are helping the candidates kind of solve these problems, figuring out which hints to give them that don't give it away, but at the same time help them when they're stuck. And teaching younger developers is something very beneficial to your career as you move higher up the ladder. And it also exposes you to a lot of different people coming in. You get to see kind of where they're at, what their backgrounds look like, etc. So it's another way of expanding your horizons. And overall, it's a nice activity that has very high ROI. And every once in a while, you'll make someone cry, which is a good growing opportunity for your EQ. Tip 8 is taking ownership. Now, this can mean a lot of different things and be implemented in different ways. I'll try to be concise and give just one example. Instead of going to your manager and saying, hey, I'm finished with this project, what should I work on next? Say, I've finished with this project, would it make sense for me to do XYZ next, or is there something more important? Obviously, before you can do that, you need to have a pretty good grasp on tip 4. And I'll let your active memory try to remember which one that was. Getting close to the end, tip 9, ask for help. But I'm going to throw in a few things to think about on top of this. One is to understand when you are stuck and when you need help. Be paying attention to when it seems you're not making any progress. To notice this is very helpful if you're following tip 3, which is to write things down. Another thing to build awareness of is who you can ask for what type of help. I'm going to tack onto that, build community. Depending on where you are in your career, you should go to your manager or your lead and ask for technical advice. Be sure to be asking for that sooner than later, especially preemptively presenting your architecture or the way you're thinking of tackling a project before you sink days or weeks into it, only to realize you've gone the wrong way. Later in your career, especially when you're working with cross-functional partners, it can be good to establish these relationships, understand who is knowledgeable about what areas, and who you can ask for what type of help. Also, as engineers, as we're often trying to present ourselves as knowing everything, which is probably a mistake, sometimes you can be hesitant or resistant to asking people things or confessing you don't know something. And in those cases, it's good to have a community of support who are not in your direct line of reporting. Maybe you don't feel comfortable going to your manager or your tech lead and confessing you don't understand how this thing works. Is there someone else you can ask who you can rely on to get some help? Or maybe just use a rubber duck or talk through some problems. Some of the best help that I've gotten over the course of my career has been from friends and colleagues rather than from managers or official mentors. All right, finally, step 10, take initiative. And this can be extremely simple. Maybe you need to be the one to volunteer to set up a meeting or to run the stand-up or organize some documentation. Whatever it is, it's almost uncanny how many times in a meeting there's a long pause waiting for someone to make the first move. But if you go there and you are bold and you're willing to take something upon yourself, people are going to notice and they're going to think of you as someone who gets things done. And that's the person that you want to be. Okay, we did it. We got through them all. I hope some of these tips were helpful. As I mentioned, I didn't invent any of these from scratch. So I want to thank everyone on the internet who posted some ideas. There was one Reddit thread that was particularly helpful for harvesting these, and I'll leave a link to that below. There are lots of other ideas there that I didn't even have time to cover. Now, I hope that you are consuming this content actively. You're thinking about which of these is going to be most helpful for you and thinking about how you're going to put that into practice. For me personally, the things I've been struggling with the most, at least recently, have been building community and also being loud about my work. Being loud is something I was pretty good at earlier this year, but when things got really tough and I felt I didn't really have any good progress to share, I kind of put that on the back burner, but also kind of lost steam on writing things down. And now that I'm trying to get back to that, I'm wishing that I had that information at hand. So I'm going to work on shoring those back up as we close out the year. All right, I hope you got something from this. If you did, it would be great to leave a comment. Let me know what type of content you would like to see in the future. Otherwise, roll that outro music and I'll see you in the next video.